Next up, Karyn McCluskey. Karyn's got over 15 years' experience working in intelligence analysis for police forces across the UK. As we've just found out backstage, she's also worked in nursing, A&E, and all over the place, in all sorts of different stressful and intense and very dangerous situations. She's here because of the amazing success of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, which she co-founded with a colleague, DCS John Connaughton. The story is horrifying and gripping and heartwarming in equal measure. But as a planner who likes his data, I should also point out there's a story that starts with a prodigious piece of data analysis. So I'd like to give a big warm welcome to Karyn McCluskey.
Well, that's my motto for the year: proceed until apprehended, unless you're a criminal, at which point you're not allowed to do this. The one before last was, it's always better to apologise than to ask for permission, which is useful in the police. Listen, I'm just going to go through our story. Actually, I can't see the audience now, it's really bright. And I'm going to show a piece of CCTV which is very violent, because that's what I do violence. So I will warn you that it's coming up. For those that are really sensitive, I'll tell you to shut your eyes for a couple of minutes. But it's really important that you understand the sorts of things that I do. So my story started up when I came to Strathclyde. And I'd come from West Mercia Police, and it was bloody lovely. We'd had 3 murders in 3 years, and my sole role was to phone up and say, can you call Chief Inspector Taggart, there's been a murder, as the only Scot in the police force. It did lose its, you know, I got bored of it after a while. And then I went to Strathclyde. And I'd been away from Scotland 18 years. And I realised when I went to Strathclyde that it wasn't just there's been a murder. There's been another murder and another murder. And it was just what happened. And I was really shocked, you know. And I saw an advert, not an advert, it was a paper. And it was about a young boy who'd been 16. And he'd bled to death in the gutter after being stabbed. And this 74-year-old woman had come out. And she'd cradled him whilst he died, crying for his mum. And I thought, this is it. We'll do something different now. And then I went out and spoke to people, and they said, he was all he was ever going to be. He'd be just like his dad. And you realise you've got some big challenges. And then we had this come out, which Visit Scotland were delighted about. And pretty much what it said was, Scotland was the most violent country in Europe, and Glasgow was the most violent city. I quite like to put Colombia on there, because it makes us look good, you know. But we're better than Colombia. And you can do 2 things when you get things like this, and you know, Michael, as a politician, will understand this. You either argue about the figures, or you do something different. And you know, we had a zeitgeist, and you know, and I came along and I said, let's do something different. Let's admit that we've got a problem. You know that? Our name is Scotland, and we have a problem. And we did. We had huge problems with violence. Most of you will think about Scots. And if I asked you, tell me what you think about a Glaswegian. So you're all laughing now, you know? I read the Daily Mash the other day, and it was talking about Alex Ferguson, and it said that's just what we need, is an unemployed Scottish angry man. Loosen the community. So let's speak the uncomfortable truths amongst friends, behind closed doors sometimes, but it's really just to admit that we were not at a place that we should have been proud of. But remember, violence has been around a long time. I mean, I know when you had the riots, I think they'd like to think that London invented this, but Plato talked about it, 5th century. What has become of our young people? Peter the Hermit, about women. As for the girls, they are forward and modest and unladylike in speech. The only way is Essex, that's all I'm saying. So it's been around for a long time. We are taught not to be violent. We have an innate predisposition. That's why you teach kids not to hit. So, what happened? This is a really wicked problem. It's complex, it's complicated. I'm not going to get to the stage that I say this is fixed. So I went to the Chief Constable at the time and I said, sir, despite the best 30 years of policing, you've made no difference to preventing violence. He was delighted. That was normally the stage that he would normally send me to the traffic department. But you know something? This is when you need a good leader. And he said, do you believe in what you're doing? I said, I want to do violence reduction. And he said, do you believe it? And I said, yes. He said, do you have a map? I said, no, but I've got a compass. I know where I'm going. And he said, on you go and do it. And I started to engage people. And this is when I realised how it was going to be actually quite hard. And I wish I'd chosen burglary. because I started to speak to someone. I spoke to someone very senior in the prison service. And I said, I want to reduce violence. And he said, it's too big, don't bother. I've never been back to see him. You get 3 options. You can lead, you can follow, or you can get out the way. That's the only things you can do. So you have to pick which one you want. You can choose to help. You can choose to follow someone. But please don't stop progress. If it's the right thing to do, and I'm wrong all the time, but it's a wicked problem. So, right, I'm going to show you a piece of CCTV. I'm the only sound here. If you don't like violence, please close your eyes. I'll tell you when it starts again. Right, so, because you need to understand what I'm talking about in gangs. Can somebody run it, please? Click it. Right, so this is Glasgow city centre. It's 9:30 on a Friday night. What you see is lots of young men issued with hormones, don't know quite what to do with them, haven't met women, you know. Right, and they're fighting with belts. This is city centre. Now, young guy down the bottom here, he's got a knife, and you'll see them. Now, there's an element of happenstance about things like gang violence. Now, one of them trips up and goes down. Wait to see this, and they're on him. Look, they give him an absolute bleaching. I want to watch, right, this is David. David is 15 and a half. He's running down the yellow lines. He stabs somebody on the way by, see? Now, you'll see him now. There's a young man, he gets out the taxi, and you'll see he stabs him once. Wait to see what he does when he sees the blood in his knife. He goes, yes. You bring a child up in a war zone, you will create a warrior. In normal circumstances, I'd be telling you his life story, but I don't have time. And you would see how he got to this. But can I just ask you, can you watch everybody else here? Look, this is you and I out for the night. Normalised behaviour. This is where you guys come in. How do I make that wrong? How do I make people intervene? Bystanders. Picks up his hat. CCTV does not prevent violence. It makes the detectives look good. Wipes blood on the window and runs down. By the time he reaches the bottom, and you'll see the police catch him, we catch the feckless and the stupid. The second man died at the scene. So it was a murder. David didn't leave the house that night to murder someone, but he absolutely, just the most traumatic things. And it's really difficult when I watch this. I've watched this lots and lots. But this is violence. You see it in the television, it looks plastic, doesn't it? It doesn't look real. This has got everything, and I will tell you this guy lives, and you'll not actually see anything. This has got Buckfast, which is our local Scottish tipple, and two groups. It's the last piece, it's the last clip. And you'll see them, one of them's running with a knife, he's a faster runner. And he's sprinting up here, and then the other guy goes down behind a car. Now, his friend comes back to help him. Gangs. They've got a machete, they're stamping on his head, and then they smash a bottle over his head. Who does that to someone? How did our empathy, where's the empathy, the compassion for humanity that lets you do that? And for nobody to intervene, nobody to stop. And somebody said to me, oh, there's a girl in that group. I said, can I tell you, if that's the worst thing you think about that, I'm doomed, I need to go home. So, first off, you cannot police your way out of it. We have relied on the police. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you're going to see everything as a nail. Let's face it, if jail worked, the US would have no crime. They jail 3 million. I'm a great believer in jails. You need to jail those you're afraid of and not those you're mad at. You can't police your way out of it. You have to do something different. And I suppose this was my eureka moment. They said, you know, how do you do things that are very different? And what we did was, we turned it on its head, because criminal justice is, the model that we use is, you report an offence, I then record it, we then investigate it, depending on how good your police force is, not the Met, we'll detect it, somebody will go to court, you'll have swift visible justice, and somebody will go to jail. That's the criminal justice model. And we said, let's do something different. Let's talk about this as a disease. So, if public health, when they were looking at measles, said, let's look at that criminal justice model. What they would have done was wait until you get the spots, you then go to hospital until the spots went away or you died, and then you get out. That's a criminal justice model applied to health. But what they did was they said, let's look at surveillance. What's the level of the problem? Well, only 30% of violence is reported to us. What are the risk and protective factors? What drives you towards this? And then what works? And then when you find what works, you scale it up. So we started to talk about violence as a disease. When do you catch it? How do you pass it on? How do you prevent it? And we started to talk about violence as the disease, and in Scotland now, violence is a stated public health issue, just like TB, just like a whole range of other diseases. And I never talk about violent crime, because when it's crime, it's a policing issue. When it's violence, it's everybody's issues and yours. Now, this is how to stop an epidemic. If we had Ebola, this is what we'd do. We'd interrupt transmission. We'd then change the behaviour that stopped you getting the disease, and then you would change the norms. So this is what the WHO do if there is a disease. Now, we started to think about this as applied to violence. So, interrupt transmission, parenting in early years. I used to frequently speak about the way to prevent murder was about good parenting and good support for kids. And there was a headline, and I do think it was in the Mail, which said, Karyn McCluskey needs to get back to the kitchen and start baking scones. The irony wasn't lost in my family, because I'd been in my house 4 years before I realised the oven didn't work. So, you change behaviour. What are the behaviours that lead people to it? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the gangs later on. And you change the norms that say that this is acceptable, because it absolutely isn't. But I rely on the media and people like yourselves to change norms, because I'll only get to a few people. You'll get to tens of thousands. So, we then started to focus on teachable moments. The teachable moments are the moments in your life when you're motivated to change your behaviour. Prosecco and De Clementi. Mine's is the 1st of January, always when I'm trying to get the zip up in my skirt and I've eaten too much Quality Street and I get my arse back out running. Or it's the day after you've been out, you know, drinking loads of lager, and you wake up and you think, I'm never drinking again. So we focused on the teachable moments. Parenting, the most important time in the world, when people are so motivated to look at a child and want to make a difference. And we try and capitalise that. We've put tens of millions of pounds back into parenting support. When you're assaulted, if I punch you in the face, which I'm not going to because I'm violence reduction, even though I'm Scottish, you'll lose your teeth. And then I used to say, what does your dentist say to you when you go into dental surgery? Nothing. So we started to train all the dentists to intervene. So they're not doing that thing, you know, are you going on holiday? They're actually asking you how you got assaulted. We train vets, because in domestically violent relationships, men will subjugate the women in the relationship by breaking pets' legs. So when they're bringing in pets with non-accidental injury, we get them to intervene with the person who's bringing them in. It's about thinking differently how you can change the norms and change behaviour. So let me just talk about the gangs. We had 3,500 gang members before I stopped counting. So see, if you're going to do something, you have to do it big. So I decided we'd do a call-in, and we'd motivate everybody into a courtroom, and we were going to tell them to stop. And when I told the chief this, he was like, oh, you're bonkers. Right, on you go. But beware, you're going to have to take responsibility for this. And I said, I will be accountable. If this doesn't work, if it goes horribly wrong, I'll move on. So we did a call-in. And the way that we did the call-ins, we got them in from prisons, we got them in from schools, we got them in from parents. We were knocking on parents' doors saying, the next time I come to your door, I'm going to be telling you your son's dead, or your son's just been arrested for murder. Now you have to get him in here. And so we had all these gang members in the court, and we had horses outside, and we had everything, boats, you know, helicopters, the whole lot, because we had about 150 in the morning and then another 100 in the afternoon. And we got the chief to stand up, and the chief said, tonight it stops. And what we were doing is we were flashing their pictures around the wall, because we know who they are. And you could see, he said, the next one of you who commits an offence, we're going to take out your whole group. So what one of you does will affect everybody else. And you could see them, you know, their chests were out and they're like, come ahead, because it's the cops. And then we got a surgeon up, and the surgeon said, I'm an expert in cleft palates. He said, and I fix babies, and he puts all these babies up. He said, I've now got a waiting list, he said, because I'm so busy stitching up you guys. And you could see that they couldn't even look at the pictures, because we have the worst rate of facial injury anywhere in the world. We have the Glasgow smile. It's not really a smile, can I tell you? It's the most horrible injury. And they couldn't look. But the most important thing was we got a mum up. And she talked about the time that her 16-year-old boy died. And she goes into his bedroom every single day, and she will never forget it, how her marriage split up. The pain that's caused, and can I tell you, I could hear them crying in the back of the courtroom. And then what we said was, you can make a change. Because these guys have got they don't make a decision about where they're born, who they're born to, what school they go to, even what gang they go into. We said, make a change. And we gave them an opportunity. We gave them an 0800 number. It was very complex. I've not got time to go into this, but what we said was, make a choice about your behaviour. Make a choice to change. I thought we'd have nobody or we'd be overwhelmed. We were overwhelmed by people who wanted a bit of aspiration, who wanted hope, who didn't want to be alienated anymore. I think 2-3 years down the line, we have a 54% reduction in our gang violence. One of my young guys I introduced to Ken Loach 2 years ago. He made him the star of a movie. He's a methadone baby. His family are all heroin addicts. Anybody can change. You just need to create the right opportunities for people to make, some contribution to society. Here's my favourite. People always say, oh, what about the crime stats? See, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Tell me, why is it people reporting dog fouling in the East End of Glasgow is a good thing? Any ideas? Why is it a good thing? Now, because 2 years ago, they were reporting people fighting with machetes in the street. And dog fouling is what you and I all complain about. That's what the middle class complain about. That's a good thing. Because they're no longer arguing about, gangs and knives, etc. So it's something that's changed. Sometimes you have to look at change in a very different way. Am I nearly 20 minutes now? And here's the thing about strategy, because I was asked to speak about strategy. I've been very different. I've had to both write the strategy and then stay on and deliver it for 9.5 years. I've had to be very sure that what I was going to do was the right thing. And I've been wrong. I do a whole lecture on failure analysis. It's very good. It's very cathartic for the Scots because we're very Calvinist. Activity. I put people into 3 groups. I have the ones that say, you're absolutely right and I'm with you and I'll do something. I've got the middle group say, you're absolutely right, but can I tell you that sounds like more work for me and I'm not overly keen on that. And I can convince them. And then there's a group, the guy that said, that's too big, don't bother, who just don't want to see it. I don't go back and see him. My time is much better spent on that middle group and that first group. I work with the positive architects in life who want to make a change, who you can inspire with a vision, who agree to the same vision as I do. Here's my challenges. I need leaders, not technicians. I don't care where you are in your organisation, you can lead. You can just lead outside your authority. Don't talk to me about process. I'm not interested. You can change the process, that's bureaucratic. Professional gangs. If I had a taser to use on public services, that would be a really good thing. That's when I really need a gang injunction. Because the gangs are actually dead simple. The professional body's much harder. I always think about outcomes. I talk to people about outcomes. I say, do you want to reduce violence? And nobody ever says no to me, which is always a bad thing, because I'm a professional stalker. People always say yes to me. And that's my vision. Do you want to reduce it? I don't care how we do it. I know how I want to do it, but there's other people that will know how they want to do it. And I always talk about the assets. Progress isn't built on deficits. Progress is built on assets, the good things. The glass half full, the aspiration, the hopefulness, not the deficits. And the thing is, we were speaking earlier on about why we're inhibited. We're inhibited because we don't aspire, that we focus on the negative, that we're in a psychological recession. And that's a really difficult thing when you're trying to change the culture of a nation. You need to have the stomach for uncertainty and ambiguity and see when it's really hard. When we get murders or when we get real horrible events, you need to be able to hold steady in a difficult context and have real resilience. 3 most important words in leading change: resilience, resilience, resilience. And you need to set the mood music. I need to create people that I say, if you're going to come and speak to me at the end, I always say, if you speak to me, can you have a verb in your sentence? A doing word. I normally say that to public services. Don't just say that was a great presentation, I quite liked your earrings. What's your doing word? What are you going to do to help me do this? But there are those out there who don't want you to succeed Machiavelli is my favourite. I've learned more about Machiavelli since being in the police, I have to say. There are always those who are going to say, oh, let's not bother. They don't like the tall poppies. Don't try and do something different. Maintain the status quo. Huge resilience. And you need to aspire. Whatever you're going to do, aspire to build the cathedral and know the garden shed. I phoned Rudy Giuliani in New York and I said, how did you do this? He said, Karyn, you always need to be prepared to have the speech on the steps where you say, these buggers aren't doing it. So you always need to be prepared to do that, but you also need to aspire. You know, I need to do things that are quite big and I need to change, well, help change our country. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.